Hey guys, thank you for joining us on what is going to be the first of a whole bunch of workshops this week on a number of topics which you guys have asked for on the 30-day challenge Transform Your Running Facebook group. This is an opportunity for me to dig a little bit deeper into a number of really key topics, pertinent issues that I know a lot of you guys struggle with and a lot of the runners that I work with struggle with, and if I can just give you a little bit of information that will help just break free of a few of these issues, then your running will benefit dramatically. Now, as we get into the first of these particular topics today, I want you to bear in mind that there's actually a download below this video that you can click, and you'll have access to a PDF document which actually works through a short workout to actually help you implement the information that we're going to work through today. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, I actually want to, in this first video, address a topic which affects so many of us. A topic which is largely down to our kind of 21st century lifestyle, which basically is the fact that we all sit down too much. Okay, and you will have probably read around this, and it's certainly something that's been written about a whole load over the last few years. And I want to quickly talk about why it's a problem, but also talk about what you can do to start to mitigate the problem and make it less of an issue in your life and less of an issue which is going to affect your running, because that's the key. Now, eventually we get into a position where if we spend so long sat down, it affects how we move. It affects our hips, it affects our posture. We kind of become kind of desk shaped, if you like. That's certainly a term I find myself using more and more. We end up in a position where whether you're stuck behind a desk all day in a kind of an office cubicle, or whether you are sat behind the wheel all day driving, whether you do lots of long haul flights, whether in my case I'm coaching and then I spend a couple of hours at a cafe behind a table and then I'm coaching again and that sort of thing. Those time periods spent sat down, whether it's cumulative short time periods or whether it's one long time period every day, those time periods spent sat down add up. Okay, and if we compare the amount of time we spend sat down to the amount of time we spend running and just generally physically active, it's quite scary. We get to a position where we realize that actually running is the thing we love to do, but it's being impacted by the fact that, you know, our day in, day out, often forced upon us kind of postures, starts to get us into a position where physically it affects our running. What do I mean by that? Physically it affects our running? I mean that it actually gets us into a position where posturally, because we're somewhat imbalanced, we get into a position where perhaps we're more likely to pick up certain injuries from a run perspective than we would do actually if we were able to move freely and able to move kind of as easily and as well as we would all ideally like to. So some of the imbalances we start to see a lot of the time stem around this whole two regions really. So this whole kind of lumbar spine, pelvic, hip region, and of course the whole shoulder girdle region as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit. A lot of the time it actually leads into what we're going to be talking about in tomorrow's video, which is the fact that if we spend too long sat down, we get imbalance around our pelvis and we end up not able to use our butt muscles, not able to use our glutes as well as ideally we should be able to when we're running. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Tomorrow is specifically all about how to use your glutes when you're running. So don't miss that if this sounds like an interesting topic. And I know so many of you runners have been told by physios or whoever that you don't use your glutes. That is going to be one certainly to watch. Today what I want to do is quickly, as I said, talk around the whole sitting issue, but also talk through a very quick little workout that you can implement to try and mitigate the amount of time you spend sat down, to try and actually give yourself a bit more of a fighting chance to be able to get out and run unimpeded if you just spent 8 hours behind a desk for the 5th day in a row, for the 6th year in a row. You know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying. So my background, for those of you guys who don't know me, and I know a lot of you guys who are watching this will be from the 30-day challenge that we present on the Kinetic Revolution website. So if you are from there, congratulations, you've made it to this far where you've found the video. A lot of you guys haven't come from there. A lot of you guys will have found this on Facebook or on Twitter or something like that. So quickly about me, I'm a sports rehabilitation therapist. My name is James Dunn. I work with runners, and endurance athletes in general. So largely it's distance runners and triathletes, and I have done for the last 10 years or so. I specifically have a couple of interests in running biomechanics, so running technique and understanding how running techniques can be tweaked ever so slightly to help people overcome injuries, and in some respects try and take certain stresses and strains off key areas of the body like the knee. Big area for runners to get injured, various different knee injuries. If we can just make little changes to someone's form, they can all of a sudden be experiencing a lot less. Think of it as stress and strain around, again, for instance, the knee. So there are real focuses on running form in my every day in, day out kind of workload and practice and how I work with coaching runners, but also the strength and conditioning side of things, giving people preventative exercises as well as the rehab exercises if they have been injured, but getting runners onto a strong strength and conditioning program so they're doing the strength work, the mobility work, the stability work, the proprioceptive work that they need to do to stay injury free. It's fairly good base of evidence now behind the idea that strength training, in inverted commas, which covers all these different aspects, it's not just about how much weight you can lift, and in fact that's a whole nother topic. Getting runners lifting heavy weights isn't necessarily something you want to do all year round. There is time and place for it, but not all year round. Thinking about it more so as conditioning for the running that we want to do, it really, get onto a decent strength conditioning program, it really helps you avoid injuries, not to mention the performance benefits. So that's a quick bit about me. I essentially specialise in working with runners and helping them either avoid injury or get back from injury. Okay, now back to the question in hand. Because of the way a lot of us spend too long during the week sat down, and in fact, as an interesting aside, if you are questioning how much time you in reality spend sat down, you think, yeah, I'm pretty active, I'm pretty good, this might not necessarily specifically refer to me. Keep a diary just for a couple of days, or just start a timer on your phone just for a couple of days, and just when you sit down, click it on, when you stand up, click it off. It's a bit of a faff, but I think you will be very surprised at how long so many of us spend one way or another fairly inactive and fairly sedentary sat down. So in many cases, what we get into is a position where it actually starts to affect how our body is put together. And I don't mean on a skeletal level, kind of that, how our joints and bones are, because that's, while that is a dynamic thing, that's not something that's necessarily so changed in this respect. I mean the soft tissues. I mean the way in which quite often we get quite tight through our hip flexors when we spend too long sitting, and we get quite weak through our glutes, we get tight through our lower back and tight through our hamstrings when we spend too long sitting. And it's those aspects that then when we try and jump up and we try and run, and we try and get into this position where we want to be able to push this trail leg out behind us and create this nice long flowing stride, all of a sudden the tightness around the hips actually starts to stop that from being achievable. And what happens is our body starts to have to compensate. We start to compensate by shifting the position of our pelvis. So maybe getting into this position where we start to run, kind of sticking our bum out slightly. Okay, this kind of sat back in a chair type position as we're running. We see so many runners who are kind of bent forwards at the hips, who then have to really extend through their back to try and feel like they're running tall. Those kinds of patterns are quite easy to spot once you know what you're looking for, but also quite easy to feel. If you feel like you're quite tight through the hips, if you feel like you get a stiff and sore low back when you have run a certain amount, it would be worth looking at your hip mobility. It'd be worth thinking about, is there something that you can start to do to actually start improving the way in which your hips are moving on a day in, day out basis, mitigating the amount of time you spent behind a desk. Okay, now, obviously, if your boss is going to buy you a standing desk, then fantastic. We can all kind of lobby for that, but most of us probably won't be so successful. But if your boss is willing to do so, brilliant. If you work from home and you can implement a standing desk at home, again, fantastic. But the reality is, actually, a lot of the time, our situations are imposed upon us a little bit, and not sitting behind a desk, sometimes, well, it's just the hand you're dealt. So what can you do about it? Well, firstly, we can get you into a habit, a routine. You can even set a timer that goes off once you've been sat down for an hour, 45 minutes, hour and a half, and then you can get up and work through just a short routine of stretches, or just get up and move. Find a reason to go and head over to the filing cabinet over there and take a call over there before you come back to your desk, rather than just finding you literally haven't got up for 4 or 5 hours straight, which happens. If you can find a way of starting to implement a short workout every lunchtime, then that's even better. And at worst, if you can implement a short workout or a short set of exercises just before you actually set out on, let's say, your evening run, then that in itself is going to be a fantastic way of just starting to loosen your hips up a little bit before we get into a run. Now, I mentioned around hips and pelvis. Of course, that region is a region that really starts to get imbalanced when we spend too long sat down, but also the upper body. Quite often we get runners who they're in a position where their shoulders are kind of rolled forwards and their upper back is somewhat kyphosed. What I mean by that is they're somewhat, again, rounded forwards. Now, obviously, when we're running, what we really want is this nice extension and rotation available through the whole, particularly as I'm showing you on this side. Rotation through the rib cage and the thoracic spine, and extension available as I'm driving my arm back to be able to actually get that nice bit of lengthening across the front of the abdomen, switch on those core muscles that we want working, to allow us to actually use those core muscles a bit more effectively as we come forwards onto the next stride. But if we're in this kind of desk-shaped position, this kind of position where we're protracted through our shoulders, where we are kyphosed a little bit through our upper spine, or at least not even noticeably kind of hunchbacked and kyphosed, but more so we're just lacking a little bit of thoracic extension. Those sorts of things then have a knock-on effect to our running stride in general and the posture that we maintain as we run. So what I want to do is give you guys a very short, very quick set of exercises that you can download in the PDF down below this video here on the page, that you can simply work through. Okay, every day that you get out of the office, just before you start to run, just to try and undo the effects that being sat for too long behind a desk will have on your body. Okay, so these exercises, I want you to think of these less as static stretches, because they're not, and I don't want you to be doing static stretching before you get out and run after a day behind the desk. But what I do want you to be working through is a number of mobility exercises, exercises which are going to help you engage the right muscles and work through the appropriate range of motion that you're going to need as you start to run, the sort of range of motion that you won't have used throughout the day as you spend the day in the office behind the desk, or the day in the cafe behind the desk, or the day behind the wheel in the car. So to start out with, we actually start with a standing hip flexor stretch. So a stretch where we're going to elevate one foot up onto a bench or a chair up in front of you, some sort of surface in front of you at around about knee height. Okay, but then rather than just dropping straight forwards into the stretch, I actually want you to think about pelvic position. I want you to think about squeezing your butt. I want you to think about drawing your belly button in and then starting gently to push your pelvis forwards in that position. Okay, keeping the back foot way behind you and the heel just off the ground with that back foot, you should start to feel a good stretch around the front of the hip, around those hip flexors, particularly focusing on iliopsoas, which is the deeper one of those hip flexors, kind of starts on the front of the lumbar spine and goes down through the pelvic bowl, rather than rectus femoris down the front of the thigh. This exercise is great for starting to actually improve the quality of the hip extension that you've got available. We're going to hold this statically for 20 seconds, but then quickly move on into more of a active mobilization, where we're just doing 1 second off, 1 second on, 1 second off, 1 second on, little active mobilizations. Okay, so we do start out a little bit static to start with, but then we quickly add movement. And it's this adding movement that really starts to help warm those tissues up and get you ready for running. We do that 2 or 3 times on each side. Okay, from there we've got an exercise which some of you guys will be familiar with, those of you who have done the 30-day challenge. It's our Spider-Man rotations. So we're in this long, deep lunging position, one hand, well, both hands on the floor to start with, and then one hand rotating out and round. And what we're trying to do as we reach up towards the sky is combine a good stretch for your hips. So it's not just going to be hip flexors, it's also going to be adductors as well, with a good bit of rotation through the torso and opening out the chest and starting to extend through the torso as we reach up and look up to the sky. We then bring the hand down and do the same on the other side. And as we do that, left, right, it also challenges our core core strength and our ability to balance. Okay, so it really is with this exercise a great exercise for hitting multiple birds with one stone, if you like. We're getting into a position where when it comes to effective use of time, we're really starting to open out the hips and open out the whole kind of chest and shoulder girdle really effectively. Okay, from there we move on to a pigeon stretch variation. A variation on a stretch, in fact, that if you're familiar with yoga or something like that, you may have already come across, but this one adds a bit of more dynamic movement. So we're going to statically get into this pigeon stretch. Again, the video for how to do so is in the download that comes alongside this video, so have a look at that. But we're then going to add movement to the left and to the right, constantly moving from one side to the other. We're particularly targeting a muscle called piriformis, a muscle which is deep in the hip, deeper than those glute muscles in the hip, which sometimes in runners especially, again, those of us who have fairly weak glutes and perhaps spend a bit too long sat down, that muscle tends to tighten up. And if piriformis tends to tighten up, sometimes that can start to give us pain around the hip, but also sciatic symptoms. From there, still thinking about the hip, we actually get into a hip circles exercise. And the hip circles exercise is less about finding extra mobility, more about now activating the right muscles. And we do this in order. So we've intentionally gone for these mobility exercises first to encourage the movement. And then once we've started warming things up, we can actually start to get into this activation work where, as an exercise, this hip circles routine actually starts to really target a lot of the different muscles around the hip. So we're going to be warming up glute max, glute med, glute min. We're going to be warming up those hamstrings as well. But particularly because we're focusing on trying to get the movement from the hip, it's going to be those glutes, it's going to be those muscles close to the hip joint itself that actually start to get the most benefit from this. But you are going to feel it in your hamstrings. What I want you to try and do as you're performing the hip circles drill is to try and keep your torso as stable as possible, as still as possible. Try and feel for the movement coming from the hip itself. And we're going to go back to a straight leg, out to the side, and then into the knee to elbow, and then so 10 of those, and then 10 in the other direction as well. So we're working multiple planes of motion in both directions, really hitting all sorts of different muscle groups around the hip, but doing so in a non-weight bearing position, low position, a position that's just going to work to wake the muscles up rather than particularly fatigue you. Okay, so again, you can add that in pre-run as part of a warm-up rather than something which is going to make you specifically tired and affect the run itself that you've got coming up. Now, of course, it would be remiss not to think about the upper body. And the way in which sitting down for too long, as I described earlier, has an effect in terms of bringing us into this kind of protracted, hunched over kind of upper body position. And there are a couple of exercises I want you to work through to try and affect this as well. We can work through a very simple pec stretch. So when we spend too long sat down, so we're kind of in this position where we're using the keyboard in front of us here, and our shoulders are rolled forwards, or even worse, we've got an iPad here in front of us and our shoulders kind of roll forwards. We get a lot of the time quite tight through pec minor, okay, muscle, part of the pectorals group, which again sits right at the front of the chest here. Okay, it's not the big kind of more defined pec muscle that we be familiar with. It's more so just across in this position. And when he gets tight, he'll draw the shoulder forwards into this forward position that we don't want to be in. But we can start to actually do something about pec minor in terms of giving a little stretch, and again just holding the stretch for just 10 seconds or so in a position against the door frame. Again, have a look at the video in the download, the bonus download that comes with this video to describe exactly what we're looking to do. But that again a few times through, not in one big bout once a week, but doing that a couple of times a day, every single day, will just start to loosen off the tightness through your pecs. Okay, and particularly again if you've been sat hunched over a workstation all day and you're looking to get up and run, it's a great exercise just to try and open out your chest a little bit and put you in a better position from a body point of view. And it's not, of course, just about stretching off tight muscles. We also need to strengthen muscles that sit lengthened all day when we're here at a desk all day. We need to think about how we can strengthen the muscles, particularly around the shoulder blades. Okay, the muscles of your upper and mid back. And there's a great little drill, and I called it an ITYW drill, which I go through. Again, there's full description is in the download, which you can very quickly work through. And it's one of those exercises that doesn't look like much, but it really starts to pick on weaknesses in that mid-back region. Okay, and the stronger we can get through that mid-back region, the easier it's going to be for you to get into this kind of open chest, shoulders back and down type position that we want to get into when it comes to good running form, and that we all usually associate with good posture anyway. And we can go through again on a regular basis, every day. If you recognize this position as you, every day we can just go through a couple of sets of this ITYW exercise, and it'll just over time gradually start to get stronger through that upper and mid back. Again, not necessarily something you'd want to do pre-run, this particular one. You might want to do it when you get home from your run, but all the other exercises I'd actually stick in. Just make 10-15 minutes for yourself before you get out and run, just to start to warm up the hips, engage the right muscles around the hips, and feel that your run will benefit from doing exactly that. It's the sort of thing in our Bulletproof Runners program that I get our guys doing as a set of pre-run exercises. So I change it up every week and give people a different set of pre-run exercises. But this is what we're focusing on. We're focusing on combining mobility with activation. And then across the rest of the week, we're focusing on strengthening, stability, all these different key areas when it comes to a runner's kind of setup, if you like. Strength conditioning program, how we can improve their body to be able to actually withstand a certain amount of mileage, a certain amount of training that comes in chasing down their goals. So certainly something, the same process, the same principle, the same thought process will be equally as effective in the little program that I'm going to give you as an example down in the downloads there. So have a look at that below this video. Okay, so tomorrow we're going to go through a video, as I said earlier, to do with engaging your glutes, using your butt muscles as you run. Something that so many physios have probably told so many of us all about, in terms of it being something we need to do more, and that we don't do enough of in terms of using our butt muscles with run. But we so often, or I so often hear from people that, you know what, I really struggle because I know the physio says I need to use my butt as I run, but I don't understand how. I want to give you some simple cues, simple techniques you can use to actually start to be able to switch those butt muscles on as you run. Certainly something to keep an eye out for. The link to that particular video is actually going to go live tomorrow, so remember, check your emails. There'll be an email waiting for you. As soon as I set the link live, I will post an email and you guys will be the first to watch this. But in the meantime, what I'd like you guys to do is to just jump quickly into the comments below this video and leave literally 2 seconds. Just tell me what you're training for next year. What does 2017 have in store for you? I can't wait to see all the different challenges, the different goals you've set yourselves, and what you guys are up to, and I cannot wait to share that information about switching those butt muscles on tomorrow in tomorrow's video. So keep an eye out on your emails and I'll see you then. Bye now.